Episode 7 of the Untitled Fire Blood Bowl podcast is here. We are getting to about the halfway point in the season. Things are starting to tighten up. It's getting intense now. Are you feeling the pressure?
Uh, I felt a lot of bombs over this past weekend. That's what I can tell you. I felt quite a number of explosions directed my way, so I think it's about as intense as it gets.
Well, I think that sounds like something we will be getting into later in this episode as we get into some recaps of games that happened this past week. Nice thing about this week, we covered about a third of the games the week before, so we got a little less recap. We got some more time to dive into some technical talk about some offense before we get into our week 7 preview, and also a little bit of playoff talk. We're getting to that point.
Yeah, the playoff picture is really taking shape now. I don't think anybody is still mathematically eliminated at this point. However, it's getting to the point where mathematical eliminations are going to start occurring. So if you feel the pressure, you are gonna want to buckle down or risk getting cut out of the playoffs.
Yeah, this is a time where teams are really starting to hit their stride. So, unfortunately, wins are going to be tougher from here. But on the inverse side, if you win out and get the glory, then it's going to make it that much sweeter.
Yeah, that's true. There's always that last playoff spot is always fought over for sure. There's usually kind of a scrum for those last couple of positions, and we saw last year where low seeds made really deep playoff runs. So the step one is get to the playoffs, and then step two is win playoff games.
All right, let's get into this week 6 recap for our remaining week 6 games. Dead Man's Hand Division, Return to Monkey, and the Rotten Peaches. This was a matchup of two of the top 3 teams in the division, and it was a tie. What you kind of expect from two coaches that are very close.
Yeah, apparently this was Bomber's second best game of the week. Um, he had a little bit of a friendly fire incident in the game, but I think Bomber is what saved the game. And as I think John had the ball in the second half, was making a play for the end zone, and I think from what I understand, a Bomber throw blew up the whoever had the ball at the time, and then he was scrambling to try to get a pass into the end zone. I believe pass was dropped last second, so the last possible chance to score failed. Him telling that story honestly reminded me of the time I played Amazons, where I don't know how many passes I had dropped in the end zone to either win or tie games. But yeah, I think this on paper this is not a matchup you want if you are the ogres because you just don't have like a good way to injure Amazons. And so I'm sure Sean had his hands full the whole time.
Yeah, looking into Knox was a somewhat bloodless game as far as casualties. Of course, there was a death of an ogre.
Yeah, that
Uh,
was the friendly fire incident apparently. So yeah, it's if someone's gonna kill an ogre on your team, they had better save the game. And that's apparently what happened here. So
yeah, a small price to pay for not losing at this point in the
yeah, yeah,
season.
the down payment of one ogre's life.
All right, next game up was Parceros Nocturnos and of Salesmen. A 2-1 win for Black Orcs over Dark Elves in one of two Black Orc Dark Elf matches this week.
Yeah, and so this was an early defensive touchdown from Dark Elves, put them ahead. And anytime you get a defensive touchdown with an elf team, you have to feel pretty confident about the rest of the game. I believe there was not really a good way to stall on the defensive touchdown. If you can like strip the ball from the person and then also run out the clock for quite a bit. So it looked like the Black Orc team was able to rally, get the touchdown, and then play some sort of grueling defensive game, take the ball, and then go score. Honestly, what it reminded me of when I was looking at the tour play feed. It reminded me of Chase's Nurgle team, the Nurgle Dane Blighting Irish. Back in season two, you would see his box score of a turn 9 foul, a turn 10 foul, a turn 11 foul, a turn 12 foul, a turn 13 foul, a turn 14 foul, a turn 15 foul, and then a turn 16 touchdown. And so it looks like the second half is just KOing L's from fouls, taking the ball and going and scoring.
Yeah. Yeah, like you said, it's if you can get a score early with a team that is like high agility like Dark Elves. So it's got to feel good just to be able to put that pressure on forcing your opponent to take some risks. Um, Fortunately, since like Jurgen was able to, mitigate that. Obviously, having the goblins, I think, kind of help. You got players that you don't mind
He,
fouling with.
he took some damage on the Goblins. I got to see just like a little bit of it. I got to see the defensive touchdown get scored. And I believe he had lost three Goblins really early. And so I don't think he had much in the way of Goblins to run the ball after that. So he can't do like stretch plays with like a Goblin picking up the ball and handing it off to another Goblin or anything like that. I think he just had to play tight, conservative Blood Bowl. And then Jurgen's very good at playing that style of Blood Bowl.
Yeah. All right, next game up, we have the V Stars and Halfling Justice. Unfortunately, the bloodshed of Wood Elves has continued into this week. Another very high injury game
Yeah,
for the V Stars.
you're right. I think the final score of this game uh, does not like describe how the final score looks one-sided when you look at all the casualties. Apparently, the first drive of this game was absolutely bonkers. Uh, Mike set up his offense, and then do we need to cut? Okay, sorry. I don't know if you need to make a time note there. Okay. Apparently, Mike set up his offense, and Wayne rolled a blitz, and the ball was kicked short. And so uh, Mike starts his turn one with like Griff in possession of the ball. And there were some wacky things that happened. I think Griff ended up getting knocked down or lost the ball, failed like I think it was somebody failed a handoff to Griff, something along those lines. I'm trying to recall exactly what occurred, but uh, the ball ended up on the ground and an elf ran over there, grabbed it. Uh, One died Griff and KO'd him or something like that and ran the other direction. So Mike was actually in the lead in that game, 1-0. But then Griff came back from the KO box and the trees just began smashing wood elves left and right. And so Mike had, I think, four people on the pitch at the end of the game to try to play defense, and that's not where you want to be with wood elves necessarily. So I think the final score may look like a total crushing, but early on it was not necessarily guaranteed to be that.
Yeah, that's definitely a place where going into the game, you don't want to have just 11 players against a team that is as strong with the tree men and also willing to foul and has extra players as well. Like if the halfway team is trading you 1 for 1, you're going to run out of players before they
Yeah,
do.
if you're trading a 70K wood elf for a 30K halfling, then you are way behind.
With that game too, the Half Injustice jumped into lead of the division.
Right.
That was obviously week 1 loss, routed off a bunch of straight wins.
Yeah,
So,
undefeated in divisional play still.
mhm.
Only a loss to the cross divisional game. And the tie from Return to Monkey and Rotten Peaches, there was a world, depending on how these games shook out, that your first through third looks different than it did a week ago. But now you've got Halfling Justice in the driver's seat. Return to Monkey, uh, I think, kind of favored in that matchup if they play, but that's not a guarantee. That's not a clean win necessarily. Ogres versus Halflings is always a goofy game. It's just kind of stunties into stunties. And then Amazon's half step behind the Ogre team. And the Return to Monkey and the Rotten Peaches, I think, was the only of those matchups that has been played so far. And so you still have two out of those three possible matchups between those three teams that need to be played to see who ends up in first.
Next up, we've got the Imperial City Retainers versus the GGs of Electric City. That was a 3-2 win for the GGs. That is a game we'll touch on a little bit here, but if you want the full recap, you can go and check out the Substack post from Fred. He did a bit of a doubleheader this week between his week 5 and 6 games, so make sure you go check that out.
Yeah, and this game looks to be like a pretty cool shootout. I love this style of Blood Bowl game where both teams are just dunking the ball again and again and again. And then, finally one team blinks and the other one is the one that gets to walk out of there. So, yeah, definitely a cool game. That would have been like a fun one to watch for sure.
Yeah, if you need any more incentive, Fred did refer to me as a classic.
Oh,
So
excellent, excellent.
yeah,
Yeah.
really a game he even taking a loss came off it really enjoying the way it
That's
played
good. That's
out.
good. Yeah, yeah. I think if you score two touchdowns in a Blood Bowl game, whatever else happened in the game, I don't think you can really be disappointed with your performance, right? You scored twice, right? That's usually enough to win the game against a lot of teams. But if both teams are high octane offense, and I mean, Chris showed last season with Elvin Union, he's not scared of trying to score points with a passing game. Yeah, you got to be happy with a performance like that, even if it ultimately it didn't end the way you want.
Right, moving over to the Snake Eyes division. First matchup we got is Slaughterhouse 11 and the Blood Moon Gang. Gonna go ahead and dive into this one.
Cover into that game. Yeah. So this was a goofy game. Most games against goblins are goofy, and I heard about this game all weekend. And then some people say that my immediately follow up game was Karmic Justice for the game that I had against goblins. Whenever you play against goblins, you don't need every single die roll to go your way to even win a game, right? And this was a game where my luck was far in excess of what I actually needed to win it. Like I rolled my first blitz of the season in this game, and at that point, I think he had like six people on the pitch. Uh, it, my first drive, I peeled like five goblins, and I fouled Morg to death in the game. Now, before the game starts, I was giving him 450k in inducements, which is a recipe for disaster if you play into his inducements and I just like if I just let him have Morg blitz my blood spawn, there's like a world where Morg kills my blood spawn. Or even if he doesn't kill the blood spawn, if Morg puts my blood spawn on the ground and then the loony comes up and takes a chainsaw to the blood spawn, I could be out of blood spawn and that would suck. That would be like devastating at this point. Now, the Bloodspawn did not have a great game ultimately. I don't think he even managed a casualty versus the Goblins. Now, I got a lot of casualties, but that was just from random hits on Goblins. A lot of stunty players just kind of explode whenever you touch them, and that's kind of what happened here. The Goblins picked fights they really shouldn't have. They were like throwing two dice uphill in a couple of places. Warren had fun in the game because I think he's got like a checklist of things that he wants from a game. As long as he does something, as long as there's a couple like goofy things that happen, he's relatively happy. He did bullseye my ball carrier with a throw teammate at one point, which was pretty hilarious. And there was a goblin who walked away from 20 dice worth of frenzy blocks in a turn. It was like six consecutive three dice blocks into this goblin, followed by a two die block, and the goblin was still standing after that. So that was funny, So it was a very one sided game. I managed to protect the Bloodspawn from Morg, And then once I had killed a bunch of goblins, that's where I sent the blood spawn after Morg. And I didn't even like have the blood spawn camp on top of Morg. I wasn't going to take that chance. I kept marking Morg with blood seekers. And then eventually that's where I went for like a +5 foul on the first foul I threw on him, took him out of the game. So yeah, it was appropriately Slaughterhouse 11 actually had their first slaughter.
Sounds like that one goblin needs a raise, so
Yeah. Yeah.
surviving that much. All right, next up we got Bad Moon Rising and Great Tree Good Boys. One member of this podcast, I think, might have
An
done some
apology.
cursing.
Yeah, sorry, I can only use my powers for evil. Um, my apologies, Jim. I'm sorry that a hex was cast upon you, unintentionally.
Yeah, I got a little bit of recap from Will on this game, and he said it was kind of just a dicing that happened. Able to pull out the 2-1 win over Necromantic War.
Yeah, so the funny thing is, I actually think gnomes are really good against these bashy, relatively slow, bashy, grindy defensive teams. I think this is where gnomes can excel. Because they have jump up and wrestle. A lot of times when you're a playing into stunties, you really want to leverage your block characters. And that doesn't do as much against gnomes because of the prevalence of wrestle all over the team. And so you can end up where gnomes wrestle like a ghoul to the ground. And then it's a premium foul target. Not to mention that trees are really hard. You can mark trees with zombies, but you're going to end up taking attrition on zombies throughout the course of the game. And you do not want scenarios where a tree squares up against, like, say, a flesh golem, because your flesh golem will not get to contribute meaningfully elsewhere in the game. You really want your 4 strength pieces against stunties, bullying stunties, kind of like dictating where the stunty players can move in the game. And yeah, and if your opponent is rolling hot as the stunty player, then things just go sideways fast. So I can see I didn't want necessarily to curse Jim, but this is was one of those games where if stuff went wrong, it goes sideways fast and it's hard to recover.
Mm, yeah. We got Zero Luck Shucks, Dodge This, our second Dark Elf Black Orc matchup of the week. And this one went the opposite direction. 3-1 win for the Dark Elves.
Yeah, the Zero Luck Chucks actually dipped into their bag of tricks for this game. The Zero Luck Chucks, I don't know if we mentioned this on the podcast or not, but they were out both the Witch Elves. Both of the Witch Elves got stat downs when they played against the Skaven team. One Witch Elf got a strength down, the other one got an agility down, and they don't. If you don't, I mean, that's just a retiring for both of them. So Zero Luck Chucks really kind of needed a win to kind of get back on track. And this game was one where stuff just went his way, and that's what he was saying. It was not any crazy any misplays or anything like that. It was just take the ball from the Blackwork team, put it in the end zone, do that a couple more times. So
Yeah, and the recap that we got from the Dark Elf coaches seemed like the Black Orcs were not able to break armor a bunch.
right,
So that I think is a team where if you are not getting elves off the pitch, it's going to be a problem as the game goes on.
yeah, and Dark Elves are the hardest elf team to take off the pitch. Due to a combination of skills and armor, they're very sturdy, and so without dedicated fouling, without bonuses, without mighty blow, it can be hard to get enough dark elves off the pitch.
Okay, last game for the division for this week. We had the Electric City Maulers and the Southern California Trojans. 2-1 win for Elven Union over the Chaos Renegades. I have a quote of elves doing elf things from the Mahler sketch.
Yeah, right. I think the way I phrased it previous week was that this was an elf match, and one team is all elves, and the other team has one elf. And so it looked like Chase was taking damage throughout the team. I do think the Elven Union lineman is probably in the top, we'll say, five most hazardous positions in this league. We'll put Halfling, we'll put Norse Journeyman, we'll put Goblin into that mix of other dangerous professions. But the Elven Union linemen have been asked to take an unholy beating from Chase's opponents, and they have.
Yeah, this is do you feel the game? Obviously, we were talking about the game the previous week is like one of the games we were watching. Do you feel like, given the recasts that we've gotten, it lived up to those expectations?
Yeah, so I think several of these games, like even I think several of these games that we were kind of eyeing as like could be close, could go either way. I think several of these games probably lived up to if you were a neutral party watching the game, you had no vested interest in it, and you just wanted something entertaining. I think a lot of these games would probably fall into that category for sure.
Our last game of the week, interdivisional Teal Terror, the Sleeve Stacks. Someone was walking out of here having not lost all their games, at least a draw, but we got a 3-1 win for Lizardmen over Dark Elves. Seemed to be that it was going to be one of those nothing ever happens games, and then the Lizardmen pulled off 3 touchdowns
Right.
with nothing else in between.
Yeah, the recap that I got from Barbie was that I think she rolled five consecutive ones at one point in the game, and that's just a death sentence for elves.
Mm.
It doesn't really matter what else the rest of the state of the game is. If you're just going to roll five ones in a row, something bad's going to happen. So I think she had a hard time keeping the ball safe because her people were tripping over their own feet. Um, and at that point, if your opponent is just kind of like failing a bunch of stuff, it gets really easy to win a game. So,
Yeah. Looking at the Dark Elf roster, I'm wondering if there is just a sort of lingering effect of not having a bunch of star player points accrued in the early
yeah.
half of the season. There's just kind of a drought.
Yeah,
It's,
right. And I think because Elven Star players are so expensive, it gets really hard to overcome that deficit. Now, Elf teams traditionally score a whole lot of SPP in the early parts of the league. Traditionally, that doesn't seem to be the case in this league. It does appear as if the three Dark Elf players, I mean, what's their combined total? It's sub 50% at this point, right? Um, so the Dark Elf players have been struggling to get their teams off the ground, which means you are playing from a deficit the whole time. And so Blood Bowl is a momentum based game, and so losing momentum early in a season really stings.
yeah. Speaking of SVP, one of the best ways that you can get some SVP is through scoring
Yeah,
touchdowns. So,
offense. This is offense talk.
yeah.
Excellent segue there.
So, yeah, we want to talk a little bit about offense. Obviously, there have been some routes that have been maintained by people in this room currently recording.
I apologize for nothing.
I mean, yeah, you can't apologize for cinema.
Yeah,
Yeah, so obviously we're playing from different perspectives here. Horn, obviously, you got a lot of movement six. Um, I'm coming at this from a different perspective, of just having a slower team. So I think we can like at least talk of it for a good portion of the league. Um, you've also played faster teams in
yeah,
the past, so you have more insight on what it takes to be one of these sort of high flying offenses. So I guess how would you like? What's your offensive approach with some of
right.
those teams?
Yeah, so I think ultimately what is going to dictate your offense is whether you have a dedicated passing player on your team or not,
Mhm.
right? The human ish teams usually have some sort of thrower. Amazons, Nobility, humans themselves. Norse have the Valkyries. All of those teams that have agility 3, mostly across the board, and a dedicated passer means with rerolls, you can do like a 1 in 9 failure pass followed by a 1 in 9 failure catch, which ends up being like about an 80% accuracy for a quick pass. And then you can follow that up with a handoff, which is another, if you're willing to dedicate a reroll to it, 1 in 9 chance of failure. So you're down to like 70 something percent. And for me, those are pretty good odds to get a touchdown. I will take those odds oftentimes, especially if you can protect the ball. I think there are a lot of people who will air the ball out over players and give the opponent a deflection chance, which is not something I'm for. I don't really want to give my opponent a chance to roll a 6 and interrupt my turn. But yeah, I think whether you've got a passer or you just have to run the ball the whole distance of the field from wherever it lands on the kickoff, those are the major decision points on your offense. Uh, if you have to run the ball, it is easier to run out the clock. Funny enough, it's a lot like actual football in that regard, right? Run offenses eat up a lot of clock in the NFL, in college, where and Blood Bowl is the same way. You kind of have to bowl over your opponent to get down the field. Whereas passing teams, you can cover a lot of distance in a short amount of time, but there's definitely more risk to it. Same thing with passing and regular football because there's always a chance of a pick, always a chance of pass getting deflected and stuff not going the way that you want it to. It's a little bit different in regular football because you just get to reset and then do it again on the next play. But in Blood Bowl, if you lose the ball, then you're often having to fight for the ball. So, yeah.
I know in previous weeks you described your offensive style this season as sort of fumbling the ball forward. Um, is that something you would recommend to people? Is there a certain like play style you think that plays better into?
Yeah, so I wouldn't recommend it. It's just like how the drives have kind of worked together. I think it's so corn. It's a unique combination of the amount of frenzy that you have on the team,
Mhm.
where sometimes you will start a model's activation. It doesn't quite end up where you expected it. And so uh, I will often end up with players tied up that I meant to use to kind of shore up. I think when you're talking about offense and you're talking about protecting the ball, you have two types of defensive configurations. There's the cage that most players are going to be familiar with. The 5 players, the person with the ball in the center, 4 people on each corner. You've got the cage, and then you've got screens. And screens are a little bit more loosely defined, and there is more room between the ball and wherever the tackle zones of the people on the screen might be. Um, Screens are really effective for elven offenses because screens are better if you are a dodgy team. If you're a bashy team, you don't mind if all of your players are all in one kind of big jumble because you can beat your way out of it. Elf teams, Skaven, teams with a lot of dodge Amazons, screens are very effective because they've got crumple zones where your opponent might make a big ingress into wherever the ball is. But now they're stymied with the rest of the screen, and then your ball carrier can dodge out and go and keep advancing with the ball, and then you can reposition your players in another loose screen. And against slow teams, that's pretty effective because you'll end up stranding their players at various positions across the field, and they're having to like make go for it, which offsetting the dodges that you were making as far as like forcing your opponent to try to make turnovers.
Hmm. Yeah, I think actually really relevant to a team like Corn with all that frenzy where you can put yourself into positions kind of all over the place. I'm somewhat of a frenzier myself with Troll Slayers. Um, and a concept I like to apply that I picked up from other games in the past, mainly actually Malifaux, being a game where there is a lot of variance also just in that. And what you do with a piece can change over the course of just activating it. Concept I picked up from that from podcast early on was the concept of OODA loops. It's basically just a little acronym, stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. And it's simple concept really is just like when you're looking at something on the board, you need to it's something you just go through with like each play. Like you can sit there and like, okay, I see I have a 2 die block here. I'm going to take this block. And you see the result of that. And then that's like the next loop. It's like you're just always looking for a spot on the board that you can do something. That's something I try to go through as much as possible, picking up some things. I've been trying to practice my offense a lot this past week, actually, um, getting the high flying Dwarven offense rolling. But it's really saved me in a couple situations where it's like you have with a team like Doors, especially that doesn't have that passing element, you have to plan out so far ahead in advance where you're going to go. And being able to have a plan, then have your opponent if, impact the plan, being able to reorient yourself and say, okay, this is what's going on now. Here's what I need to do is just a skill that is really going to help you in a lot of games, not just Blood Bowl, like any
Right.
game. Um, that's just a concept I like a lot in being able to because there were situations where you have um, you know it'll just come up where it's like, oh, I need to set up this wild series of chain pushes if I want a chance to score.
Yeah.
That's always the thing.
Right. So the thing that I would add to this is that Blood Bowl is a game of extremely high variance, but there are things in the game that are deterministic, right? And one of the deterministic things is whether you can score or not, right? If you have people who are not in position to score with their maximum amount of movement and plus go for it, that's deterministic. You have made it in a place where you cannot score. The reason why Skaven are so kind of disgusting on offense is that you can have a gutter runner slightly past midfield, and that gutter runner can score, right? Lizardmen with skinks are very similar to this as well. You can have a skink just like 3 spaces across midfield. That skink is now a scoring threat with 2 go for it. And so if you do somehow defensively stop the ball and end up with it, and you get the ball over to your person who is a scoring threat and you get it away from the rest of the team, then that's my example of like a deterministic offense, right? Whether your opponent can touch one of your players with the movement they have is another deterministic thing, right? Counting squares. And so the really fast players that can make a quick breakaway, um, having them staged in places where you can score on a very quick turnaround is really important. Knowing that the clock is winding down, knowing that you only have some number of turns to score in, that's something you have to plan for, especially if your team is bad at offense, right? If your team has to run the ball, you touched on that definitely with dwarves. But yeah, I'm sure you'll see way more touchdowns with dwarves when you actually have dwarves in scoring positions, right? And it can feel like you're making the wrong play sometimes because you have to like take a very valuable piece away from the scrum. But if you don't have an out to score, right? Another concept from other games, playing to your outs. Blood Bowl is the exact same way. Play to your out, play to your opponent rolling double skulls. Maybe they start their next turn off with no re-rolls and they double skull their first block, right? You have to play to those outs. And then when you do that, you'll be surprised by how many more games you win.
Yeah. Um, Another thing I like to think about, especially with doors, is not every team can do this, but the idea of like dictating space on the board can be really important, especially for a team that is slow moving. Just being able to like, you need to be able to carve out your spot and stick with it. And not every team's gonna be able to do that. Sometimes you have to, like you said, you have to put your players in scoring positions, and that to me is like predicting. Like you're like you can predict where you're going to have space end up, or you can dictate for yourself where that space is going to be. And it's like being using we're just drawing all the terms from other games today, but like determining who's the beatdown.
Right.
The classic magic concept of being like dwarves are almost always a beatdown. So for
Yeah.
me, it's very much like I'm going to be the one that is dictating where the space is on the board. Whereas if I'm playing against like elves, elves are probably going to have to say, okay, the middle of the board is lost. Where can I get around and try to predict where a gap will open up to find a scoring position?
Right. A way to think of Blood Bowl, I think for a lot of people, they think of it as just playing football. But if you break Blood Bowl down to a basic strategic level, it it is oftentimes a territory based skirmish game, right? You're fighting for territory. At a very basic level, Blood Bowl is a territory based skirmish game, and I think you can make a lot of progress as a player by viewing parts of the board as like territory and go or checkers. You don't want to give up key squares because that gives away a specific advantage. It's the same thing with like other basic board games like Othello, right? In Othello, the corner spaces are the most powerful spaces on the board. So, in Blood Bowl, the sideline is a very powerful place to be. It's also a very dangerous place to be. And on the topic of frenzy, you know, forcing your opponent to the sideline to have to like play defensively on the sideline, and then you are running the threat of just dunking their dudes in the crowd over and over again. You're fighting for that territory there. That's what you're trying to like stake out a claim for, and you can use that to your advantage. Frenzy's on like a ton of teams ultimately, right? Frenzy's on Dark Elves, Frenzy's on Norse. A lot of big guys have Frenzy, Rat Ogre, and whatnot, right? So trying to decide where you want to kind of like stake your territory and then using models to protect territory on offense is really important because there's a lot of times where I've played offense and I've moved to one side of the board and my opponent commits really hard to stopping me on that side. And then you have to loop around to the other side of the board, kind of loop around the wedge that they've created. And if you've kept your territory kind of staked out with a couple extra players, you can then use them as the formation of another cage or another screen on the other side of their offensive setup. And then they have to like swing back around the other side. And then sometimes they're out of position then, right? So
Yeah, I mean, really, when it comes down to it, like we're talking about offense at this point of the season because there's the old adage of points or prizes. Like this is the point, like it is crunch time for a lot of teams to win some games, and if you want to win a game,
you got to put more.
you got to score
Yeah.
at least one more time than your opponent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Last thing we got before we go into the week 7 preview is, of course, our in memoriam section.
Sad
Um,
trombone time.
yes. As far as our named players from beloved coaches rosters, we got Tyrion Graveshadow, Wraith from Bad Moon Rising.
Yeah, this is the one that I feel like is the genuine curse here. Wraiths are extremely powerful players, and this Wraith had a level up, and the I always feel like Necromantic is a team that is like a couple steps ahead of Disaster. And I feel like Jim has had kind of a disaster of a season despite his really strong start. Um, uh, because he's lost a werewolf and a wraith, both of which had levels, which it stings quite a bit. His werewolves have not really even fully recovered from that original werewolf loss.
Yeah. Of the players you could lose, though, at least a Wraith comes out of the kit a little bit better and he
That
has
is
some
true.
skills.
Yeah, hiring a wraith back on the team, a rookie wraith is like an incredible player. They're just kind of a crazy player. They're really only balanced by the fact that they have no hands. Otherwise, this player was just disgusting from the jump.
Other named player, we talked a little bit about it earlier. Slow learner, the ogre for Return of the Monkey, hired and then immediately killed.
Right. Yeah. He took a bomb. He took a bomb that was meant for a bunch of Amazons. From what I understand, they had to go double check to make sure that the that you actually hit downed players with bombs, and yeah, you do check to see if a bomb explodes on a downed player. And when that occurred, the I think most of the Amazons were fine. Like the bomber drilled the shot, detonated the bomb, but checked for the ogre, and that's where the ogre exploded and then died. So
Yeah. We had another journeyman die, Might of Asgard. Austin just building a season on the bodies of journeyman Norse linemen.
yeah, just there's a sail like a boat salesman who's making a ton of money on all these Viking funerals. Somewhere, uh, we need to check Austin's. We need to check the bank records. Is what I'm saying. We got to follow the money and see what's going on.
Yeah. Also, two star players got killed this week. Cindy Pie Whistle and, as you alluded to, Morgan Thorg.
Yeah, that's right. I stepped on his head.
Yeah. Unfortunately for everyone in the league, they will be back.
Yeah, yeah. I wish in a league there was a way to like debilitate star players for an amount of time. They have to go to their cryopods or whatever. They come back to wake up and but no, they'll be back despite the minor setback of death.
Yeah. Although, I mean, personally, having Cindy back might be something that I personally benefit from. So I won't, hate on that too much. All right. That all we got left is week 7 preview. Dead Man's Hand. We've got Book of Grudges and Return to Monkey.
It's a one to watch.
Yeah.
Playoff implications.
Well, implications. Ide is down a Bull Centaur thanks to um, certain coach on this podcast. Bull Centaur that will be in. I don't believe has skills and has armor 9. Not a place you want to
Oh
be
no.
when you're facing down a bunch of Mighty Blow on the other side.
Yeah, and the ogres, they're starting to pick up block,
Yep.
getting scarier. The question remains whether the return to monkey luck holds up against the dwarven players, like he did when he played against you.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, it's another game where it'll be a good one. Sean currently getting money in that game enough for some bombers. So yeah.
Yeah. He seems to subscribe to the air plan, the air raid plan. So
Next up, we got V-Star Steel Terror Elf on Elf, Wood Elf or Dark Elf. It's a bounce back game for Wood Elves, possibly.
could be, yeah. I mean, these are both really kind of underperforming elf teams at this point, right? Uh, Neither one of them is going to have like a crazy advantage over the other, right? Uh, you got war dancers, which are always good, but Mike is probably going to go into the game with journeyman. I think he's played with like 3 or more journeymen for quite some time,
Mhm.
and so he can't really afford to lose players. And sooner or later, Barbie will actually roll some casualties on somebody. So not trying to curse Mike here, not trying to do that, but
Once again, disavow alternates from other entities on this podcast. Interesting stat line. Obviously, last week we brought up the casualty differential for Wood Elves, which now stands at -18. Um, but also, interesting stat, we have a league with doors and chaos doors, but least casualties sustained against a team is this Dark Elf team with
Yeah,
4.
yeah.
Uh,
And a lot of that was actually in the Amazon game, right? That was the thing that I had pointed out is that, yeah, Barbie's team's kind of underperforming, but it's healthy. It's in one piece for the most part. So we've got one person who can't keep their elves alive and one person who can't hurt people but doesn't lose elves. So in the battle of the movable object versus the stoppable force, I guess we'll see who finally wins. So
right. Okay, next up we got Imperial City Retainers and the Rotten Peaches. Retainers, not to spoil too much from Fred's article, but Retainers are down their thrower.
mm,
Um, so gonna be interesting losing that dimension of your offense against a team that is
if
really good at stealing a ball and running.
if he's got money, I would consider hiring a second thrower for this game. Maybe you can get away, like you can run a gunner runner only offense for sure. But the thrower really helps out versus Amazons because we talked about in the offensive section, it's a very positional game. And in tournament play, Skaven have given me fits with Amazons just because they've got gunner runners. They're so fast, and you don't kill as many Skaven players as you always expect to. And the Rat Ogre's prehensile tail can be very troublesome for you. So having to try to balance all of the negatives of playing against Skaven versus the positives that you have as Amazons can be kind of tricky. If you get lucky and you peel some rats, then and you get a little bit ahead, then you can afford to send some line women after stepping on gutter runners and stuff like that. So
Nope, next we got Might of Asgard, Parceros Nocturnus. Those teams are starting to power up a little bit. I think like you're starting to see some more skills on the Dark Elf team, and Austin's been doing rolling along with the Norse.
yeah, I don't know how to predict this one. This one is a bit of a toss up.
Mhm.
I feel like Austin's team is on the upswing, and Maria's hasn't taken the damage that we've seen the other elf teams take. Both Maria and Barbie have kept their teams healthy, and so it's tough to call this one. Could be a draw. I could see a draw
Mhm.
from this game, but then again, if the Norse have a game, like it depends on the Yeti, right? If the Yeti has a game where he peels a couple of linemen, you probably feel better about your station in the
Mhm.
game. Whereas if the elves just get to kind of run the offense they want to run, and you can't really penetrate into their screen, you can't get people off the pitch. You're not getting a whole lot of blocks as a Norse player. It can be really frustrating. So
Yeah, yeah. I think that's definitely a game I'm gonna watch this week. 'Cause I think there's a
yeah,
world where it's like one player's dice heat up. That could like lead to it could be a blowout. It could just go. It could go any way. Yeah,
right.
it'll be a good
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm like predicting scores of games, a lot of these are going to be like 1-2. But you could have this is a game that could be 0-1, could be 1-1, 2-1's probably likely, but the who knows if some casualties go the wrong way. A lot of times with Norse, you kind of like base your opponent because you're trying to get some blocks, and that can go sideways versus elf teams because the elves can just reposition, throw hits on you, and then it doesn't take too many hits into Norse for things to start going wrong.
Mhm. Up next, my game this week: Jolly Rotters, Righteous Brimstones. Not going to divulge all
Your
my
game plan,
tactics,
yeah.
but I will say that I am calling upon the Roly Spirit. in this
Yeah.
game.
Well, also this podcast will probably go up after the game is played, maybe. But yeah, we'll have yeah, yeah. You got some stuff in your pocket.
Yeah, this is a game. I think it came at the right point in the season where like teams are starting to get their team value up to where hiring a giant piece like the Death Roller was pretty appealing. I happen to have the treasury for it. Um, and doing kind of the calculus on it a little bit, kind of thinking through, it's like there's good chance I think that there's enough season left for Death Roller to get a skill. Um, and there's enough strength left on my remaining schedule where I feel comfortable bringing it in and like
Yeah.
having it as a piece for the rest of the season. It's not going to be like a huge liability for like opposing inducement. So I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
it's time for the death roller.
Yeah, the thing about the Death Roller is that if it's giving your opponent inducements, the Death Roller is such a serious threat that it can oftentimes take care of the inducements it gave the opponent and then a sum, right? If you get a string of really good fouls with it, you can just absolutely steamroll some of the toughest pieces in the game, and flatten them, get them off the pitch. Yeah.
Right. We have a game that did finish this week already as the last game in this division. G's Electric City, Halfling Justice, a 2-1 win for Halfling Justice that has now solidified them as the top of the division, at least through this week,
Right.
regardless of any other game's outcome.
Yeah, and it looked like the Halfling Justice game plan of have trees and pale a couple people at the beginning, let Grift handle the hard work on the offense, and then a liberal application of fouling, um, kind of continued into this game. Halflings were up 2-0 at one point, and so at that point the GG's got a touchdown to bring it to 1-2. But if you're down 2-0, the game's kind of like in the bag at that point. Um, so I'm glad Chris was able to kind of stay focused and get a touchdown. And I think that's the best you can hope for, if you're down players and you have probably lost the game. Get the SPP that you can, that because that's going to help your team in the long term for sure.
Yeah. Moving to our Senkai's division. First game of this division is my pick for game of the week. Gnarly Oaks, Bad Moon Rising.
This
Um,
is a previous championship game, like rehash. Like both of these players have played for the championship against each other a couple of times, really early in the Blood Bowl leagues. I think the first two championships were, both of them played somewhere in there, in the playoff structure. And so yeah, I'm right there with you. This is a game to watch.
yeah. Especially with Jim coming off that loss, I would equate that to, you know, this would be like playing against a Nick Saban Alabama team the week after
Yeah,
they had like a last second upset
yeah,
loss.
right. Yeah, you don't want to be in that warpath. Now, Sean, crafty, canny player. I didn't take a look at the inducements for this game yet. I suspect the thing about Old World Alliance is that you can keep your team value pretty low, and Necromantic has a hard time keeping its team value in check. That is, unless of course you are losing players left and right. And so I don't know that the inducements are going to matter a whole lot for that game. But yeah, I would not want to be in Jim's sights after a tough loss, like that. But yeah.
Yeah. Quick inducement update. So currently as it sits, uh, Older Alliance is giving Bad Moon Rising 170, but that
Ooh.
is prior to a replacement Wraith.
Okay. Or any replacement players as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
So
Yeah. So
still some
yeah,
roster decisions.
right. So undead teams, I think, get less use out of inducements below a certain total than other teams. Old World, like 50K inducements, that's a bomber. So yeah, interesting, interesting. I do think kegs are pretty good for necromantic, just because your ghouls and werewolves, you don't really want them in the second casualty box, i.e., the KO box, without a little bit of help to get them back in the game.
Yeah. All right. Next game we got is Plague of Gods and the Southern California Trojans.
Now, this is a game where inducements are going to play.
Yes. And the big thing is going to be what do you have in terms of tackle options for Tomb Kings?
That's mostly going to be your. I mean, the some of the most effective star players for undead are Ivan, who does have tackle, and Wilhelm, who has wrestle, which is good against block characters. Right. Both of them are extremely good players on their own right, and then you've got the Tomb King strength kind of backing them up. And trying to keep them healthy throughout the game. So
Fortunately, fortunately for the Trojans, looks like it's not currently able to get both of them.
okay, just
It's
one.
just slightly off.
Yeah.
Those two would come in at 410,000. Currently getting 405.
All right. Yeah.
So it's close. Maybe some sort of roster
Fit.
swap could result in getting that extra money. So
Yeah.
something to watch out for. Up next, we got the Blood Moon Gang versus Electric City Maulers.
Yeah. I suspect a similar kind of bashing that Warren has received most of this season. However, I think he is going to get an amount of inducements. I don't think he's going to get quite as many inducements as I gave him. Um, so it'll be interesting to see. I think he's hiring like a new loony because his loony exploded in my game or had like uh, something bad happened to it. And so Looney is really good against block dodge characters, so I wouldn't put my Dark Elf anywhere near the Chainsaw Dude. And yeah, you got three big guys, but Warren also has some big guys plus whatever he gets in inducements. So you're kind of at an even right there. And the team is mostly human linemen, and those don't actually throw good blocks into goblins. Now, if you throw enough blocks into goblins, they'll blow up. But I think if you keep your goblins kind of like screened away from it, you can play a pretty solid defense against this team. So it's going to come down to whether you can get some early fouling damage versus the renegades, or whether you let the renegades batter your team to pieces. So
Yep. Renegades currently have 4 instances of block
that's
on their
pretty. That's a pretty
roster.
good amount. Yeah.
So
One of them's on the ogre, right?
one of them's on the
The
Troll.
troll. Okay.
The Troll has it. It's Troll, Dark Elf, and then you got 2 linemen.
Okay.
So that'll definitely be one to watch. Some chainsaw shenanigans might be in play.
Yeah.
So interesting to see what the inducements come out to. Next we got the Sleep Stacks versus ROUS. Uh, I think at this point in the season, you would not expect these players to be as close in the standings as they are.
Right.
It's been I would say, uncharacteristically low season for the Skaven.
Right. And I think this is a potential game where Juan could put his foot on the gas. Um, does his rat ogre have block yet?
Right
Lizard
over does it block.
rat ogre does have block.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So his rat ogre should stop harming itself. When I played against him, his rat ogre was a danger to himself and everyone around him. And so that's good because that means the rat ogre can bully skinks. And the Prince Altail, we talked about it quite a bit, but Prince Altail into 3 agility characters, even with dodge, that's like crazy, crazy bad.
Mm-hmm.
To have to try to get away from that. So you could have the rat ogre bullying skinks while the rest of the team just keeps the Sauruses busy and away. Now, the Sauruses could batter through a number of Skaven. So I mean, a lot of Blood Bowl games come down to early casualties. This game could be one of those. Whoever gets the most early casualties.
Yep. Jeremy is currently down 1 Saurus. Has 3 with block. I think funny thing will be is seeing if he puts those 2 stinky get skinks
Yeah.
to use.
Right.
Some juicy targets
Yeah, oh yeah.
on the Skaven side. Up next, we got your game recap.
Oh yeah.
Forest Love versus Dust.
All right. So buckle up. However long the podcast was, it's going to be that long for me. To this point, however long the podcast is run, I'm going to have to use that length of time again to recount this game because this game was bananas. It was the most absurd game that I've played all season. I can confidently say that. Um, I made a, we'll say, strategic error early in the game. However, I don't think it mattered based off of the way that the dice fell throughout the rest of the game. I don't think it would have mattered uh, one bit what kind of strategy I decided to employ. Um, so if you read in the Discord, this was a once in a millennia performance by Bomber Dribblesnot in this game. Um, Even when Bomber was screwing up, Bomber was doing more damage on his failures than he was doing on his successes. It was a wild game. The first half, I got to receive the ball, and he set up a really tight, kind of like frenzy uh, scrap defense. And he had Bomber kind of in the center of it. And my rationale was, well, if I just push my guys into the middle of him, then Bomber's going to have to throw bombs at his own people. And so he's going to have to decide whether he wants to knock down his own people in addition to my guys. And so the first thing that happens is the Blood Spawn fails to throw his block because of Unchanneled Fury. I knock over a couple other people. I frenzy. My goal was to try to frenzy somebody into base with Bomber to try to get at least one tackle zone on him, and that kind of failed. And so what it meant was that a lot of my guys were kind of clustered up. So turn one, Bomber throws a accurate bomb, and my guy catches it, and Bomber uses it once per game on the first turn to detonate it. He blows up the guy holding the ball and then rolls a 4+ for the four other players of mine that were near him. And so he knocks down five people on turn one. He KOs the guy who caught the bomb. And I think he like breaks armor on a corn gore as well. And I'm like, well, that's bad. That's kind of a disaster. Even if Bomber does nothing else in this game, wink, that was really bad. And so on the next turn, I have to kind of like stand people up. And so I start throwing some hits, and I don't really get anything done. I think maybe I KO a goblin. I don't really remember at this point. But I have to set up like a half cage, and Bomber strikes the cage, blows up a guy, blows up the guy with the ball, and KOs the dude who was carrying the ball. And so the ball's just kind of on the ground. And so now, through two turns, Bomber has KO'd two people and knocked over seven with his bombs. We can fast forward through the rest of this half. I have to do some wacky stuff like picking up the ball and just throwing it towards his end zone, because the way the scrum was going in the middle of the field, it was going so badly that I was not confident that I could protect the ball at midfield. And so I thought I was better off by just throwing it in his backfield and try to have like a corn gore get back there. So I had a corn gore wandering around in the back, um, who gets swarmed by some goblins. The ball was like an accurate pass, and so I'd spike like the six or whatever it was to get it all the way back there. And so the ball's like two spaces away from his end zone. But he's able to send two goblins after it, and he knocks over my corn gore with a blitz. And um, and so he's got the ball, but he's got to run the whole course of the field. I managed to break away a corn gore and go splatter the goblin with the ball. But then the other goblin picks it up and starts running, and then that corn gore runs and charges him down. Meanwhile, Bomber is just delivering strike after strike into my people, knocking down two or more people every single time he throws the bomb. Um, and so we get to the um, end of the half. I managed to keep him from scoring, but I have four people in the KO box and one person in the injury box, and I get none of my KOs back. He had 12 people for the game, and I had KO'd a Blackwork and a Goblin, and neither of them came back. But he's setting up. He argues the call for Bomber and rolls the six to keep him in the game for the second half. I have to set up defense with six people, and I'm having to kick to him now. And so on turn one, he like KOs a Corn Gore, and Bomber blows up somebody else, knocks him over, and so, and I forgot, Bomber actually fouled on the very last turn of the half and fouled, casualtied my blood spawn. And it was badly hurt, so I had to use my apothecary to get the blood spawn back into the game. And so, uh, yeah, he directly bombed like another player, and he goes and gets the ball, does some other stuff. And on my turn, the Bloodspawn manages to casualty a Black Orc, so I'm not down too bad. But on the following turn, Bomber blows up, knocks over the Bloodspawn, but doesn't like break armor on it. And I think he KOs one of my other players. So I'm down to like five on defense. Um, and so uh, he's moving the ball down the field. I send a corn gore after the ball carrier, and I end up basing the ball carrying goblin with a corn gore. And so he's burned through his rerolls, and this is another thing about this game is that every time he's used a reroll, it worked. And he used rerolls on his troll and bomber quite a bit, and he passed loner checks on each of those, and to have the player do the one thing. One of the bombs that bomber threw was inaccurate, and it scattered to the hands of one of my players who caught it, and the bomb did not blow up in that person's hands, and so they went to throw the bomb back. The original bomb was targeting two players. This person was based with two other players. And so when I went to throw the bomb back, I rolled a one and fumbled. That player blew up and then blew up the two other players that were next to them. And so Bomber's failure actually increased the number of players that got knocked over by one in this instance. And so, yeah, as the second half continues, I managed to peel like another black work with the Bloodspawn. The Bloodspawn, honestly, this was the Bloodspawn's best performance. He was absolutely stellar in the second half. I passed Loner to reroll a couple of checks with him to make sure that he did the thing that he needed to do. And so uh the Bloodspawn was just fighting the black orcs that were on the table, more or less by himself. And so that way the two corn gores that I had remaining at this point could go after the goblins. And so he casualties both of my bloodseekers like really close to each other. So I'm down to three people. And he goes to blitz the corn gore off of the goblin with the ball, and I managed to, and he rolls a one, uses his last reroll on the go for it, and rolls a one, and this guy falls over, eats pavement, and so I have the corn gore blitz over the ball goblin, pick up the ball, take off towards the other direction, and at this point. This is where his rest of his team starts chasing this corn gore down the field. And he would keep failing a roll right before he could do something to the corn gore with the ball. And he went to throw the a bomb with Bomber after the corn gore, and this is the first fumble that Bomber rolls in the game. And Bomber blows himself up, and he was adjacent to a black orc and another goblin in this instance. And he blows both of those players up as well. And he even like stuns the black orc with the armor break. And so my Korngor chases off down the field. He has to like blitz a goblin off of him and keep running down the field. I managed to sneak the other Korngor around on the other side. Um, and because I had used it to tie up like a black orc in one instance. So Bomber like recovers and walks down the field. And so it is we're creeping in towards the end of the game. A couple turns left. I move my Korngor up to the point where he can score. And so on his turn 16, Bomber drills a pass to that Korngor, strikes him, knocks him over, blows him up. He ran like 20 squares down the field. Gets hit with a bomb right before the end zone. The other Korngor makes the pickup go for it to score to win the game on turn 16. Despite the artillery that rained down on me, I used the scene from 1917 in the Discord, but that was more or less the final mad dash towards the end zone that I had with just artillery raining down on my team. Chase put the total in the Discord to keep track of the number of rolls that he made. That bomber rolled. It was a total of 23 out of 24 knockdowns. And that was four pluses for those. And so Chase was saying approximately 1.5 times out of 100 million for perspective. Yeah, I feel incredibly lucky to win that game, considering I played against essentially, I don't know, military operated drones for the whole game. So,
Could it be that you participated in a game and got to witness the best game of Bomber Dribble Shot's entire career?
it's entirely possible. I have always hated bombers. I've been pretty clear on that stance. I hate bombers um, because of this reason. Because you do not know when they are going to decide to uh, hit you with like an asteroid from space, right? Like I could have been playing the lottery instead, or Nate could have been playing the lottery instead, right? And we'd be $300 million richer no, instead, I barely win a game of Blood Bowl after seeing one of the most least statistically likely things I have ever seen in gaming.
I feel like, when you read like the Spike journals, they have the game summaries of
Yeah,
the star players, what they did. I don't like Games Workshop could not come up with a
right,
game
right.
that was this crazy. All right, we got two games left. We got No and Great Tree Good Boy Use. No's got a moving up on Fox. That's our
Oh,
first setup. So
right. Let's see if Will's luck can hold out against another undead team. Um, Mummies are definitely scarier than flesh golems, and because mummies are a threat to everything that they can get their hands on,
mm,
and uh whites are really good too. Um, and you get more ghouls. So you got a little bit more ways to move the ball on a shambling team. Um, but if your game plan held up versus necromantic, it might hold up against shambling.
yep. And I mean, looking at playoff race here, like a win for Will puts him in a solid place looking towards the playoffs. Gonna get some wins. He started off the season a little bit rough. 2 wins in a row would be a good rebound.
It would be,
Yeah.
yeah. It would go a long way.
And so our week 6 recap, we had a Dark Elf Black Orc matchup go the way of the Black Orcs. We had a Dark Elf Black Orc matchup go the way of the Dark Elves. Our interdivisional, we have a Black Orc Dark Elf game. Zero Luck Shock's having to play Black Orcs the second week in a row.
Yeah. Yeah, and of salesman having to play Dark Elves the second week in a row.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. Jurgen said he was going to be tired of Dark Elves by the time the season was done. But he won the first game, so it'll be interesting to see how this goes. I dice rolls. Do dice rolls matter in the game of Blood Bowl? I don't know. Maybe. Um, yeah, I think it depends on whether Travis's team stays healthy early in the game and throughout the course of the game, or if he's able to do the Maria thing and take out some of John's goblins, but able to like leverage that into like a game long advantage. Who
Mhm.
knows?
Yeah, yeah, it'll be interesting. Obviously, he's got a little bit more tackle on his team than Maria had,
Right.
so that could come into play against those stunty little goblins.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the last game for the week.
That's a wrap.
Yeah. Week 7. You've already played your game, so
Yeah, I get to
I know how
sit.
you feel about it.
I get to sit on my hands for a bit. I get to sit on top of the standings for now. In our division. I still have some really tough games ahead on the schedule. I've lodged wins over people further down the chart. I've got like I feel pretty good about my wins over Sean and Chase. Seeing as how they both have had like a really good snapback in the rest of the season. But Jim is still lurking out there. Henderson, Alucard, all of those guys are right behind me, nipping at my heels.
Mhm.
So I'll be interested to see how those games go. And
Yeah.
I don't know who's next
Mhm.
after the break. So
Yeah. Yeah. And as the season goes on, as we get closer to the playoffs, like it's gonna be that playoff race discussion is gonna be eating up more of our time
right,
as we
yeah.
kind of, especially
Once
once teams we kind of like figure out, okay, looking at it, this team's kind of favored here. That's the story. How do they overcome that? Like
right,
that's
right.
gonna be more of a storyline. It's
Yeah,
gonna
right.
be where players end up.
Yeah, right now there's a lot of scenarios. There's a nearly infinite number of scenarios based on how games play out. But the more games you play, the fewer scenarios there are, and so it'll be easier to crunch where exactly they players are gonna to end up, and who's in and who's out.
While we wait for another real bubble to be played, that's going to be it for us. Appreciate you listening. You want to give us a like, follow, subscription, wherever you're listening to this. Also, to make sure to go check out the Substack
Yeah,
and read Fred's sideline reports. They're super entertaining. Fred's got a real good way to narrativize a Blood Bowl game, make it feel like you're there watching it. So definitely recommend giving that a read. And until next time, stay safe, roll dice, don't double skull. Unless you're Clay.
yeah, yeah. This is Bob Barker reminding you to spay and neuter your pets. So goodbye, everybody.